Judges chapter 7 today. Got a timeline that we went through and have seen it every week so far. We're going to be finishing up Gideon, next week. But we're right in the midst of what's going on in the major victories, the battles that are going to happen. We were introduced to Gideon last week, which is funny because last week was when Scott's son Gideon was introduced to the world. That's funny how that works.
Coincidence.
So, coincidence? I think not. But so, we're going to keep going today. Judges chapter 7. I've got my 3 sections. The 25 verses in this chapter. We're going to start with section 1, which is Israel's army is too big. Which is funny because we found out how many people they had in their army last week. But we're going to read that, verses 1 through 8. So then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Herod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand saved me. Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many, bring them down into the water, and I will try that for thee there, and it shall be, that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people unto the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, everyone that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped, will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand. And let all the other people go, every man unto his place. So the people took victuals in their hands, and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. Okay, lots of stuff going on. Have a big group of people, 32,000. Remember, Gideon shouted out and said, hey, I need some help, Midianites are coming. He had just burnt down the altar to Baal and cut down the grove, which we worked out is another goddess being destroyed there as well as Baal's wife. That's what they used to say. So he destroyed 2 altars, put up a new altar to God. Got a nickname out of it. That was last week's chapter. Okay, the enemy of Baal. And now he has put the cry out because all the children of the east, the Amalekites, I think it was, the Midianites, people like that, came up against him. So he put out the shout, help. We're going to go and fight these guys. I need some people. 32,000 show up. And now we get to the point where God says, hey, you got a nice number of people. Remember, we get told the number of the Midianites are like crickets on the ground, and the number of their camels is like a number too big. Can't work that out. So, verse 1, we can see that Gideon rose, he got up, all those with him, and they went and camped by the well of Herod, which is also called the well of Gideon. We found that out last week as well. The Midianites were to the north side in a valley. Why is this important? Why is it important to know where things are and the direction that people are camping in? What makes this so important in the Bible? Any thoughts? Go for it.
It's like geographically real.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I literally wrote down in here, the fact they add all these geographical details just confirms to me that it's true. Because if you weren't going to say, if you didn't need to add it, you wouldn't add it. But the fact that it's the truth, they put it in there. And you go, that's really cool. So yeah, it's funny because it's those tiny details that make me trust the Bible more. That when I look on a map, I can go, okay, the well of Herod or the well of Gideon is right here. To the north of them, that's where they encamped. Well, great, I can see on a map nowadays, that's exactly where this went down. It's pretty cool. So, we can see the nickname of Gideon as well, meaning the enemy of Baal. which is funny because you remember he got that from taking down the altar and wrecking that, and the altar that was on his dad's land. That was all last week anyway, you can check out the video. So, the reason why God is saying to them, hey, the number is too big, is because he didn't want them to take credit for what's just about to happen. It's really easy when you have an equal amount of number of people, and even in this instance, we hear that the number of the Midianites is a lot more. 32 versus 135,000. So 32,000, 135,000. They're still quite outnumbered, right? But this is a test of Gideon's faith, the test that Gideon asked of God with the fleece. You know, that test that he said, God, if I should be doing this, if I should trust you, make the fleece wet. Then make the fleece dry. And God did it. Now, God is saying to him, hey, here's the response time. You tested me. I'm asking you to step out in faith now. And let me trim down your army. You put up the bat signal. You asked the nations to come along. They responded. 32,000 men show up. 135,000 Midianites they're up against. But God asked Gideon to invite all those who are afraid to go home. So there's 32,000 of them, and he stands up and says, hey, any of you guys scared? You can go home if you want. And he was left with 10,000 men. And Gideon was probably surprised. I would be surprised if you just told everyone what's going to happen. Hey, I need you to come out here and fight. Well, I'm not going to be, okay, we know what we're doing. We know what we're going to be doing. So then he says, well, are you scared about the fight? And they're like, well, yeah, we're scared. And it's like, then you can go home. Oh, that was easy. I'm out. Cool. So, 22,000 left. 32 down to 10. And we are told that they assembled in a place where they could see the 135,000 Midianites, right? The sight of this huge opposition probably helped with them being scared. If you can see this big group of people and you're like, oh boy, that makes me nervous. But I think that was all part of God's plan. The reason why they camped right there, I think it's part of God's plan. Who's going to stay with me even if it's scary? Who's going to stay with me even though it's tough? And then he says, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. So just in case Israel claimed for the glory for himself, saying, my own hands, these hands are the things that saved me, not anything else. So, this explains why the army of 32,000 was too large. If the army was too big, Israel could still take credit for the victory. They had 32,000 troops. They could believe that they're underdogs and they're all like, let's do this, we can fight, we can take over. They might have been able to win, but they would have taken all the credit. So God wanted the odds to be so bad, it would seem, in this victory, that they would clearly see who was the reason the victory happened, and that's because of God. Okay? So, if we think about this, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts, Zechariah 4:6, then smallness, the amount of people that you have in your army, does not matter. Okay? If you think about the principle, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord, our God, Psalm 27, then smallness, the size of your army, again, does not matter. What I'm trying to say here is, there's a reason why God is trimming this down. Where's your faith? How strong is your faith? Are you willing to put yourself in a crazy situation? Are you allowing God to do something amazing here? Verse 3 says, God's saying to Gideon, now go and tell people. Go tell people if they're scared, go on. That is actually a established law. Okay, back in Deuteronomy 20, verse 8, there is an established law, and it says, and the officers shall speak further unto the people, and they shall say, what man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return to his house, lest his brethren's heart faint as well as his heart. So it then goes on to say, what about the guy that just bought a farm? Well, he never got to do a harvest. Well, send him home too. Well, what about the guy that just got married and he never got to be with his wife? Well, send him home too. And it was kind of funny because it was like anyone who didn't get to do that, like that opportunity they had a chance to step out of the battle. But this was a law. This is a law that was put in place. So what Gideon is doing here, God is reminding Gideon of the law. He's asking Gideon to have faith, to follow the law, to be obedient to what he's asking. It's kind of simple, but it must be pretty challenging with that as well, you know. Go and invite them to leave. Invite them, you're left with 10,000 people. So second test now, he's already asked, that was the first test. The second test, verses 4 to 8, is all about kind of the manner of how you drink, which is kind of funny. But have you guys ever been at a restaurant and you watch people eat? And some people are just sat there and are like, and other people are like, and it's like the food's flying everywhere. The other ones are like Cookie Monster smashing into their face. You see the mannerisms of how people eat. It's not about how they eat, like in the sense of like, but it's almost about the position they put themselves in. Right? So Gideon's second test here from God, not just from Gideon. It wasn't God's smart thinking, Gideon's smart thinking of, hey, I wonder how they're going to drink. It was God saying, if they do this particular thing, this is what we need to work out. So 10,000 is still too many, right? Verse 4, God's already reduced it from 32 to 10,000, and here he reduces it from 10,000 to 300. He did this because 10,000 was still too many for God's purpose. It's kind of funny because when you think about if God could use 32,000 people, that's awesome. But when in the Bible has God used thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people? He's always used the small numbers, right? Is that correct? What do you think? Can anyone think of any instances there? When he's used thousands of people instead of just the 10 or the 12 or the 1? Right? It's kind of tricky. Because what happens here is you see the number, the bigness isn't the hindrance. It's about the faith. It's about the faith. It's hard to rely on God when we have all wonderful resources at hand. We have all these resources where we have all these things. It's tough to rely on God. But it can be done. And God is good enough to be able to do these things. But are we going to give God the credit when things go well? That's the big difference here. When you have the odds stacked against you, when you have 135,000 Midianites coming up to fight 300 Israelites, are you going to give God credit when you do that? Because you should, really. You should. So it's a hot day. They've been encamped now. They've set up camp and they turn around and goes, hey, let's go down to the water, guys. Yeah, let's go. Yeah. You know for a fact he had one guy that was like, cannonball! And just jumped straight in and just wrecks the whole test. But he had to get back out. It's fine. The Bible doesn't talk about that guy, but we know he was there. So, takes him down to the water. He says, I'll test them there for you, okay? It was a strange test, and there are different ideas to why God used this to separate the soldiers. Perhaps it was because those who cupped the water in their hands and brought it to their mouth were better soldiers because they kept their eyes on their surroundings, even when taking a drink. Think about that for a second. It describes two people. One, who rush forward, fall on their knees, on all fours, and are literally lapping it up like a dog. Anyone seen a dog drink before? It's not like they put their face in the water. Their tongue comes out, and you hear that noise, right? The other guys are dropping to their knees, but bringing their hands down and are still able to see. There's a big difference there, right? Which one are you going to attack? You got a guy on all fours slurping at water, or you got a guy who's sitting up straight, drinking like that. You're going to take the guy who's not looking. Make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a reason. Maybe it's a good enough reason to why that happens. So, verse 5, it says, So we brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, Everyone that lappeth of the water with his tongue as a dog lappeth. As a dog laps. Remember what David called, or Goliath called David, and he said, Who do you think I am? A son of a dog? Even those dogs underneath the table get scrapped. That's in the New Testament when Jesus is talking here. Dog is not exactly a nice term here. But do you think he's talking about dogs, or is he talking about the animal dogs? Is he calling him a name, or is he talking about animals? What do you think?
Both.
I think the animal.
You think the animal?
Yeah.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because it's kind of one of those things like, you see it being used as an insult, but also seen as not a very good position to be able to keep watch. So, men who took this position were not ready against sudden attack. That's kind of how I see this. If you're afraid, leave. That's the first test. If you're scared, go. Second test, if you take your eyes off the prize, leave. If you take your eyes off the enemy, go. Because God wants people who's focused. God wants people who aren't scared, who are confident in Him. And those are really simple things to think about, but in our life we can get very dissuaded. We can get pretty scared when times are not going the right way for us, when things are going hard. But think of this, God's army to fight against Satan's hosts. Think about Revelation when we talked about the big battles at the end.
Yeah.
You need to be able to trust the people that you're in battle with. But more so, they need to be trusting in God. I can stand for as long as I can stand, and you guys can stand alongside me with me, but you know for a fact that we're all going to fall down at one point, right?
Yeah.
If we're trusting in God, that's the big difference here. 135,000 versus 300. That's incredible. So how effective is the person who is scared or turning away from the threats of the enemy? How effective are they? How much confidence do you gain seeing that the guy next to you in line, ready for battle, is like, no, ah! You're not going to be too confident about that, right? Hey, bud, can you hold your shield a little bit higher so I don't get shot here? Is that okay? Ah! What happens? There's more attacks, there's more loss. Verse 6, and the number of them that lapped, putting their hand up to their mouth, were 300 men. And then God says, by those 300, I'll save you. Verse 7 right there. So God assured Gideon that victory was certain. Remember in chapter 6 what God said? Sure, I'm with you. Surely I'm with you. And now he's saying, hey, victory is certain by these 300 men, by the hands of these 300 men with you. That's less than 1% of the original army size, which I think is fantastic. He's brought it down from 100% to less than 1%. I think that's incredible. The proportion here is something like 400-ish Midianite soldiers to every one Israelite soldier. That's tough odds. Someone needs to go on some Super Saiyan rampage mode to win this fight, right? But Gideon could only trust in God because there was nothing else to trust. Now he's looking around going, there's 300 men. How are we going to win? How are we going to win? You cannot trust your own strength now. You can't trust your own fighting skill. You can't even trust yourself. You must trust in God. Verse 7. Kind of talked about this a little bit already. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by these 300 men that lapped will I save you, deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go, every man unto their place. So, by these men, 300 men, those who stay after each test, those have been, siphoned down to just the group. There will be victory. There will be deliverance through them, okay? Let everyone else go. Let them go home. Don't hold them back from leaving, because God's promised the victory. Gideon's faith was the assurance of victory, was steadfast, and he is commended in the book of Hebrews for this faith. Check out Hebrews 11:32. It says, by the faith of Gideon, by the faith of Barak and all the other people, and by these people's faith, that's how we remember them, right? So Gideon's remembered as a man of faith, which is a really cool thing, Verse 8, so the people took victuals in their hand. Anyone know what victuals are? Food. They took food in their hands. In their other hands, they grabbed their trumpets. Usually not a good mix. Don't know if you've ever played any brass instruments before, but if you eat food and then you blow in a trumpet, all the food goes inside. It's terrible. So hopefully they ate afterwards or whatever, But God's asked Gideon to do this plan. Gideon's now getting his guys ready to do it, okay? Which leads us to our next section, section 2, the plan of attack, verses 9 through 18. And it says this, and it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, arise, get thee down into the host, for I delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go with Phurah, thy servant down to the host. And thou shalt hear what they say, and afterwards shall thine hands be strengthened to go down unto the host. And he went down with Phurah, his servant, unto the outside of the armed men that were in the host. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude. And their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for multitude. And when Gideon has come, therefore, behold, there was a man that told a dream to his fellow, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and it came into a tent, smote it that it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel, for into his hand have God delivered Midian and all the host. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel, and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said unto them, Look on me, and do likewise. And behold, when I come out the outside of the camp, it shall be that, as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of the camp, and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Okay, so the plan of attack. We've got a plan here to win the day. But first things first, Gideon's going to spy. Do a little spy mission. So arise and go down to the camp. God wanted Gideon to find encouragement in this visit to the camp. You know, it's funny because God's asking him to do something hard. He doesn't just fold his arms and say, Go on, go do it then. Right? He helps us, he guides us, he encourages us to do it. And when Gideon gets there, remember, what it says is he worships because he hears what the guy's saying. He's like, oh man, I'm encouraged now. And he worships and goes back to camp. So he's saying, go down, I've delivered these Midianites into your hands. Verse 10, this is the part I love. If you're scared, Gideon, you're not allowed to go home. Take Phurah, take a buddy, take a pal, right? Phurah is potentially his armor bearer in this situation. There's a few different commentators who say different things about him, but he's one of Gideon's servants, only mentioned in this verse. This is it. This is his big moment in the Bible. And he's accompanying Gideon down to the Midianite camp and being a super spy, a super sleuth in this moment. I love that God offers someone to go with Gideon. Just like Moses and Aaron, right? Just like David and Jonathan in that situation. God's offered Gideon a partner in this. If you're scared, don't go alone. How many did Jesus send out the disciples in? 2. Don't go alone. I love that. I think that's great. Find your partner. Find your person to go and do these things with. If you feel like God's telling you to go somewhere, take someone with you. Why? Because that's what they do in the Bible, right? It's good. So verse 11. And if thou shalt hear what they say, after you hear what they say, and afterwards shall thine hands be strengthened to go unto the host. So after you hear all of this, after you hear what they're saying to each other, after you hear that, oh man, I had this weirdest dream. It was crazy. You're going to be encouraged. And this is the tender mercy of God. He dealt with the doubts. He dealt with the fears of Gideon. Remember in chapter 6, the testing of God. Are you true? Are you real? Should I be following you? And now he's saying, I want to assure you that victory is complete. I've told you I'm with you. I've told you I'm with you twice, surely. I made the fleece wet. I made the fleece dry. And now I'm telling you to go down to the camp and hear what they say about you. There is an incredible thing that's happening here where God is just encouraging Gideon to step up and to do in faith. If we could do that, man, if we could do that, that'd be amazing. So Gideon goes down with Phurah, a little scared, but went down and spied on the Midianites. In verses 12 through 15, we see that God reassures Gideon through the Midianites just speaking to each other. Because there were a lot of these enemies. In verse 12, it says like grasshoppers, and the camels were without number like the sand at the seaside of multitude, right? There's just too many to count. This is a great description of the encampment, that they lay sleeping or resting from their day of raiding. And then camels which were above all understanding of numbers were just lying stretched out round about them, you can kind of think how crazy and chaotic that already looks. Person, camel, camel, person, camel, tent, camel, whatever it is. But they're everywhere. There's so many of them. Remember what we say about God? God is the God of peace. He's not the God of chaos. What we're seeing here is God has an order. Go down to the camp. This is how you're going to do things. This is what's going to happen. With the Holy Spirit, the leadership's going to come through. You see order. You see peace. You don't see chaos. So, verse 13 tells us that when Gideon and Pharaoh were spying, they heard this man talking to a buddy of his. What does it say? To his fellow. And it says, behold, I dreamed a dream. Dreamed a dream. And it was just about to happen. This dream was just about to happen. A loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. Only the poor ate barley bread. Right? It wasn't a rich man's food. It was actually more food for cattle, barley. There's more food to be like scraps on the floor. So the cake rolling down the hill, striking the tents, overturning them. This is a pretty extensive dream, but it all connected to how the attack of the Israelites and Gideon was about to go down. The poor are going to take out. The people who are deprived are going to win. Those who have not have to eat the poorest food, barley, because you've taken all the food. Remember that? They're the ones that raided and stole their harvest each time. So it's funny how this all works, how this all connects. And it says in 14, his fellow answered and said, this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Notice that they know who Gideon is. They know who he is. Why? Has he done anything against the Midianites yet? Anyone?
No.
No? How would they know who Gideon? What's up?
Was the breaking of the idol part of it?
Maybe. Maybe they're like,
Because they said
he was the guy?
Yeah, he's ball killer, so he's probably popular.
Yeah, maybe there's something about that. I love that. That's great. Good memory right there. So, wait, verse 14. So his answer to the dream. This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon. God allowed Gideon to see a great confirmation of his work and of his future work by saying, hey, this guy, this one here. And it's not a coincidence, and it's not just luck. God used this situation to build the faith of Gideon. And it worked so well that Gideon, all that he could do was worship God in that instance. Which is funny, because he's a spy. Can you imagine it? They're like creep into some bushes. They're getting close to the camp. They hear the guy like, oh man, there was a cake and he came and crushed our tent. And he's like, oh Jesus. They're like, what was that noise? I don't know. But I find that funny, because it's like, all he could do is worship. And then he went back to the host of Israel and said, arise. Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. Gideon's encouragement was contagious. Having received encouragement, he could not help but spread that encouragement to others. And his encouragement to them built their faith. That's kind of how we should be doing it, right? As Christians, if we're encouraged about something in our lives, then we should be passing that encouragement on. Go on, push forward, do more, go, because actually that's how we're going to build people's faith in the end of it. So, the army has been brought down from 32,000 to 300. It's now small enough to be used by God to win this battle. Verses 16 to 18, Gideon announces a strange battle plan. Why not make the army that we have smaller? Let's go from 300 into 3 100s, because why not? And it's funny, because I was reading through this and I kept thinking, like, we don't know if God told Gideon this plan, but we know that Gideon was a spirit-filled man. Okay, chapter 6:34 tells us that, and it said, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Right? So he is a spirit-filled man. That means that very well could have been the Holy Spirit pushing him towards this plan, this divine situation of how to win, okay? 300 is split down to 3 100 people groups, Every man had a trumpet, every man had an empty pitcher, and his lamp went inside the empty pitcher. Okay? They divided to surround the enemy. It's a pretty good plan. The pitchers were used to conceal the torches as they got into position, easily broken to reveal the lights of these like handheld torches. A loud echo of trumpets and the shout of Israel was terrifying. Imagine being asleep and then suddenly great light bursts out, loud smashing of the pottery hitting the ground, and then these shouts, right? This is Gideon, the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash. And I think that's the amazing part. They do exactly what they say, and it causes this panic. So verse 17, he said, look at me and do what I do. This plan came very naturally to Gideon. And upon reflection, we can see like how the Holy Spirit's kind of guiding him here. But he's basically saying to them, copy what I do. People do as I do in this situation. Verse 18, blow your trumpets all at the same time. Shout, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Like what the man said to his friend in the dream. Declare it, shout it from all sides of the camp. Confirming the dream of the man, declaring who they are representing, and shouting who their leader is. Notice that it's not the sword of Gideon and the Lord, it's the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. They're putting God first. That's a real important point here. Which leads us to section 3, verses 19 to 25, which is the victory. Last section here. So Gideon and 100 men that were with him came to the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. And they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hands, to blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place around the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Beth Shittah in Zerath, and to the border of Abel Meholah, and to Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali and out of Asher, and all out of Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters into Beth-barah and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, and took the waters into Beth-barah and Jordan. Verse 25, and they took 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. And they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeb they slew on the winepress of Zeb, and they pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of Jordan. Pretty epic. So, verse 19, Gideon and his unit of 100 men were outside the camp waiting. Notice they talk about the watch, that'll be night watchmen. Everyone else is sleeping. They have a couple of people who stay awake throughout the night. And it says they're just changing watch. And they get to that second watch of the night. So maybe they did 3-hour stints, maybe 4-hour stints, who knows? But it was the second watch time, okay? It's dark. That's the whole point. And they get to their positions. And they spread themselves out. And at the start of this new watch, they blasted their trumpets, broke the pitchers that were in their hands, and all 3 companies did it all at the same time. Big noise, big light, big effect, right? Verse 20, the Midianite soldiers awoke to an explosion of noise, of light, and movement coming down on them from all directions. And no wonder they thought that they were being attacked by an army bigger than actually they were. What a shock that must have been. Who here likes being, woken up anyway? You ever walk in a room and someone's asleep and you turn on the light and they go, ah! And then they're being attacked. Think about that. And there's a camel next to you. It's brutal. What? There's camels everywhere. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, right? The cry was not the result of pride of who Gideon is. It's about telling them who it is, but who they're representing. The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Judges 7:14. And shouting helped send them into panic. Perhaps the Midianites did not know who the Lord was, but they knew there was a man sent from the Lord called Gideon. And it was appropriate for Gideon to take this leadership role and say that stuff. But notice again, They know who Gideon is. They've heard about him. He's the altar destroyer. He's the enemy of Baal, right? In verse 21, the Midianites heard this, saw this, and their reaction was to run, to cry out and to flee. They were scared. Verse 22, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. So the first phase of the battle here wasn't even about Israel versus Midian. It was Midian versus Midian, because they start fighting each other. Many camels were hurt in this battle. It's real sad, sadly. But this is a good example of how God does these incredible things, turning the people who are on the same side against it in chaos, introducing chaos there, not peace. Midianites were so scared that they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know their brother from another brother or anything like that. They panicked and started turning on each other. Verse 23, the men of Israel, they gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh and pursued the Midianites. These are the guys that have been told to go. You were scared, go home. You drank weird, go home. Hold on a second. Now, get them now. Go, get them now. You've been dismissed. You've been let go from your job. But now is your chance to get back involved again. The parties who were dismissed joined back in with the pursuit through the valley. That's pretty awesome. Verse 24 to 25, we see the total defeat, working towards the total defeat of the Midianites. Okay. Verse 24, Gideon sends out messengers. The Ephraimites were on the south and could easily send aid. So he says, come down against the Midianites and do work. This wasn't not unbelief of Gideon's part. The victory that was started here was done by the 300. Okay? God started the work with a small number of soldiers. Once the work began, Gideon wanted many to get involved in the work. But it started with the 300. And that's the whole point here. Verse 25, they pursued Midian. They pursued Midian, and they took 2 secondary chiefs. You got this Oreb and Zeb. And Oreb was slew upon the rock Oreb. Was that rock named Oreb before him? You think so? Why is that?
I don't know, it just makes sense.
Okay. And what about Zeb and the winepress of Zeb? What's that?
I think they killed them on their own location, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Like where their hometown was?
Yeah, like killed Zeb at his own wine press.
Okay.
Yeah.
It could make sense if they killed him there and then named it that too.
Yeah.
But I think it's cooler if they killed them in their own spot.
You think it's cooler?
Yeah.
The thing that's kind of crazy to this is the guys without Gideon, right? These are the guys that were without them that have left. They were scared, they were left. They drank weird, they left. Now they come back and they're holding the 2 heads of Zeb and Oreb and being like, hey, look what we did! Gideon, look who we found. They're back in play again. They're back in play. But the start of this whole plan was the 300. The small, the insignificant compared to the 135,000 Midianites, okay? But something I want you to think about is just the faith level. Because there's a new conflict, and those people who got told they could leave could have very well turned around and said, no, you didn't want me here, or I got invited to not be part of this. But they stepped back in again. They were willing to step back in and play. What it tells me is there's always a place. There's always a place for us to get involved. Okay? So, that's my overview of Judges 7. I've got 3 final thoughts for you here, and then we'll finish up. First one is, God's plan doesn't need to make sense to us. 32,000 people, we could have been like, that's a good army size right there. You could do some damage with 32,000 people. But when God starts saying, let's bring it down, let's shorten it and small, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
If you're trying to have an army of like impact, 300 compared to 32,000, that's a problem. But God's plan is better. God's plan makes sense. Might not make sense to us, but it makes sense to him, and he's the one that knows. So trusting in him is going to be the big issue there, okay? Okay, second one. Just because you don't fit into the plan now doesn't mean you're not needed. The people who left, the people who were told they can go, they were needed at the end. The 300 sparked the whole situation off, but they called back everyone else in again. And they helped finish the job. And I think that's the key part about here. You might not fit into the plan. You might look at what we do at church here and go, I don't really like the children's ministry. That's okay. Then get involved somewhere else. I don't like ministry here, there, anywhere. Well, take some time away from it and come back in because you might be needed in the future. Something to be said about that. You don't need to do it now if it doesn't make sense now. What does make sense is being open to being involved. Okay? Third one, Gideon is remembered for his faith. What are you wanting to be remembered for? I would love on my grave, if I have a grave, I haven't decided yet, but I would love it to say, Jamie, pretty chill dude, husband, father, man of faith. I would love that. To be remembered as a man of faith is an incredibly important thing. You know, follower of Jesus, something like that where it's like significant. I don't want to just be another person that just dies and isn't remembered for anything like that. To be remembered as a man of faith is an incredible thing. What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want on your gravestone? That sounds terrible, but it's something to think about. Do I want my kids to remember me as a really loving father? Yeah, I do. Do I want them to remember me pointing to Jesus? 100%. Because that shows that I'm a loving father. That shows that I'm loving because I'm wanting to know who Jesus is. There's a difference here. So, what do you want to be remembered for? Gideon was remembered for his faith. How about you? Cool. That is Judges chapter 7, guys.